My name is Matt Taverna. I'm a PhD candidate here at the Observatory, and I'm really happy to welcome you all to the Observatory and Social Media's Awesome Speakers event. Before we get started, I'm just going to give everybody a quick introduction to the Observatory for those who are maybe coming across us for the first time. So the Observatory and Social Media, which we pronounce the acronym there as OSoMe, is a joint project of the Luddy School of Informatics, Computing, and Engineering and the Media School at Indiana University. OSoMe is an interdisciplinary research group that is interested in all things at the intersection of media and technology, with a particular focus on social media, as the name implies. So we conduct rigorous academic research, build analytical tools and software for both scientists and journalists, and work to educate the next generation of computationally skilled media professionals. And if you're interested in learning more, we encourage you to check out the website there at the bottom of the slide, awesome.iu.edu, where we have all of our latest research, papers, tools, or really anything else going on with the observatory. So as part of the observatory's interdisciplinary mission, we've organized the Awesome Speakers virtual event. This event consists of a series of talks from some of the brightest researchers and scholars who are working to rigorously understand how social media, the internet, and technology impact the world. So please check out the event page, which again is linked at the bottom there, for more information on past and future talks. We have some recordings of past talks, and of course the new ones. We have some abstracts where possible. And if you find today's talk interesting, I'm sure you'll find what we've done in the past and what we're going to do in the future interesting as well. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kristina Lerman. Dr. Lerman is a principal scientist at the University of Southern California Information Sciences Institute and holds a joint appointment as a research professor in the USC Computer Science Department. Trained as a physicist, she now applies network analysis and machine learning to problems in computational social science, including crowdsourcing, social network, and social media analysis. Her work on modeling and understanding cognitive biases in social networks has also been covered by the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, MIT Tech Review, and she's also a fellow of the AAAI. So as always, I'm very excited to pass things off, but before we start, I'll just sort of remind everybody of the typical structure. We have about 45 minutes for Kristina's presentation, and then we'll have kind of an open floor for questions at the end for about 15 minutes. So you can leave questions in the chat if you prefer, but the discussion is always nice, and hopefully you guys have some interesting questions. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I hope everybody can welcome Kristina. Usually we do the Zoom clap hands as best we can. And Kristina, I'll let you share your screen whenever you have a chance.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm so really excited and happy to be here among many friends and recognize many names and hopefully current and future colleagues as well. All right, so you heard the introduction and let me just jump straight into my talk. So yes, like many people here on this Zoom call, I've been studying the information ecosystem, mostly focusing how information is diffusing through social networks, spreading through social networks, how things like network structure affect virality and human cognitive biases affect the virality of information spread, right? But over the last several years, it's become clear that the conception we have of networks needs to be rethought. So not all links are created equal within social networks. The link people are connected to their allies as well as to their adversaries. Another thing that I've been trying to study and promote over the last few years is that people not only share information on social media over these social networks, they also share their emotions and feelings and react to the emotions of others. And this emotional ecosystem creates feedback loops that change people as information is spreading online. And this scale and the speed of these emotional connections online, I'm going to argue that it create new social phenomena, psychological phenomena. They enable, for example, psychological contagion. There's all kinds of flavors of polarization, radicalization that are enabled by these psychological mechanisms that are enabled by these new technologies. At the same time, I'm going to show you that the progress in computer science has brought new tools and new research methodologies which we can use to study these behaviors at scales. I'm going to be using language models for social sensing of emotions, morality, beliefs, and also show you that finally we can study, well, I shouldn't say finally, but we can study using mathematical analysis, we can study many of these concepts in a more rigorous manner. Okay, so my talk will cover these three aspects of emotional ecosystem. I'm going to start with affective polarization that's been actually on the minds of many people lately. So affective polarization is this concept that was introduced by Iyengar, that Democrats and Republicans are more divided than ever and disagree about issues. If you look at the opinion distribution and oppositions of Democrats and Republicans, you can see how this distribution of opinions has shifted over the years, over the decades, so that the median Democrat is now to the left of many, vast majority of the Republicans. And similarly, the median Republican, what they believe in, their beliefs are to the right of the majority of what Democrats believe. But as Shanto Iyengar first proposed, that not only do Democrats and Republicans disagree, but they also dislike and distrust each other, and moreover see the other party as a threat. So if you ask Democrats what they think about Republicans, many Democrats will think that the Republicans pose a threat to the nation's well-being, and vice versa as well. The Republicans hold the similarly negative views of Democrats, and moreover, this so-called affective polarization has been increasing over the decades. And I'm really eager to see what it will be like in 2024 is the next data point that will be added here. So this affective polarization is characterized by these two phenomena. In-group love, you like and trust members of your own group, so-called in-group, and out-group hate. You distrust and dislike and disagree with members of the other group. So it's called, sometimes it's called in-group favoritism, out-group animosity, but it's more simpler to call it in-group love and out-group hate. So what I've been studying last few years, we have been looking at affective polarization, whether it exists in social media. Does it show up in online interactions between partisans? So if in-group love exists, then if we look at interactions, online interactions between people, we should see more positive emotions expressed within in-group replies. For example, liberals replying to liberals or conservatives replying to conservatives. And if out-group hate exists, then you should see more negative emotions, more animosity, more hate, more toxicity in the replies or interactions between people across different party lines. So back when, it was possible to collect data from Twitter, we had collected large data sets of tweets related to abortion discussions in 1922 when Roe v. Wade was overturned. We have collected also a large body of tweets about the COVID pandemic. We have millions of tweets from millions of users, and we have other data sources as well. For example, French elections from 2017 French elections. And we also developed methods to analyze this data. In particular, we have very accurate methods to label the ideology of people, so we can split people into liberal and conservatives and to look at interactions between them. And what the tools we are using, actually also, this research has been made possible by the rise of new language models. So language carries cues to emotions, and for the last 20 years, people have been mostly looking at sentiment, positive sentiment, negative sentiment. But we can go beyond that, look exactly at the emotions that these tweets are expressing. We can look at anger, fear, joy, disgust, and many others, more fine-grained. And this gives us more better picture, more fine-grained picture of interactions. And beyond emotions, we can also look at toxicity, we can look at hate speech, moral values that are being expressed, and so forth. And as part of one of the DARPA program we have, that some of the on the school are also participating in, we have developed language models that can recognize emotions natively in over 100 different languages, and they're quite accurate as well, not for every emotion, but for most emotions. So now if we apply these models to our data set, our social media data set at scale, we do observe signs, signature of affective polarization. If you look at this, so each box plot is showing distributions of emotions in replies between in-group replies and out-group replies. So you see that out-group replies actually express more, like if you look at the medians or the means, there's more anger, disgust, and toxicity that is expressed in outgroup interactions. And there's more joy, slightly more joy, but also more fear. I'll come back to it later, but there's actually more fear expressed than within in-group replies compared to out-group replies. And also reply lengths, like the people actually write longer messages to their in-group than when they communicate across group lines. But that's actually not all. If you actually look at this, suppose we don't have the group like liberals versus conservatives, but if you look at the structure of the networks, we actually find that the emotions are actually embedded in the structure of the network. So to study this, we actually construct retweet interactions. We construct networks composed of retweet interactions between people. And we look actually when one user replies to another one, what is the distance, network distance between them. And we can measure network distance in a number of ways. We can use this path lengths, probability of a random walk reaching one user to another. Or actually what we do is actually, because these networks are so large, containing millions of users, we embed them. We embed the retweet networks in an embedding space and then measure Euclidean distance in the embedding space as the distance measure between users. And what we find is actually that there's effective polarization actually is expressed within the structure of networks. More distant interactions happen to be more negative. Here I'm showing actually distribution of emotions in reply interactions as a function of network distance. And I've bent network distance into quartiles. So emotions, interactions, anger, for example, in the replies between nearest people are much less than anger between replies that are reply interaction across furthest, between furthest pairs of people. And it consistently goes up. So anger, disgust, and toxicity in the replies goes up with network distance. But joy and fear, and to some extent also reply lengths, also go down with network distance, so that the closer somebody is within the network, the more likely you're expressing joy and fear to them versus the farther they're away. So this is evidence that emotions are shaping the structure of networks. You know, affective polarization is embedded in the very structure of networks themselves. This holds across data sets, across languages, even across the emotion models. So for example, we're looking at the abortion data set I've been looking before. Also within the COVID tweets, if you look at measure emotions as a function of network distance, replies that are further away have more anger, disgust, and toxicity, and replies that are closer, between users who are closer together, have more joy and more fear and also longer. Also within the French election, which is in different language, different emotion models, here we actually have fear and guilt and joy that are higher in closer reply interactions rather than further reply interactions. So actually this was interesting to why fear and guilt are different than other negative emotions. So I spoke to some social psychologists because it really puzzled me. I was surprised that it doesn't act like other negative emotions. And then they told me that fear is an honest signal of group belonging. When you are afraid of something, you're not going to confide your fears to your enemy. You're going to confide your fears to a friend. And also expressing fears creates solidarity, social cohesion. So it's actually quite neat that we can actually see it in this signatures in this data set. Another interesting fact that, another interesting observation that the only positive emotion that we had observed as that changes with network distance is joy. We had other positive emotions. We had optimism, love, approval, admiration, but there's no significant difference between them. Only joy had some sort of passion. And also interesting that reply length decreases with network distance between people. People are willing to communicate more information, to spend energy to communicate to their in-group compared to the out-group. Okay, So that's findings on affective polarization, but why is it important? And I'm going to argue that affective polarization is important because it plays a role in the belief change within networks. Belief change, for example, I'll come back to this later, but during the COVID pandemic, we as a society had to make decisions as a group, whether or not masking works and we should mask or not. But this is a study of our COVID tweets. If you look at the share of people expressing pro-masking stance on Twitter, you can see like initially in the early stages of the pandemic, Republicans and Democrats, or liberals and conservatives, similarly endorsed masking, but then at some point the partisan gap emerged quite quickly in the masking attitudes, whether people believe that masking works or not. And so to explain this, I'm going to talk about introducing a mathematical model of opinion change with affective polarization. So this is actually a very, very simple model. It considers a network where you have nodes, and each node has two attributes. One is a static attribute and one is a dynamic attribute. The static attribute defines the group's identity, the node's identity. Whether it's a red node, for example, belongs to a conservative group, or it's a blue node, it belongs to a liberal group. And the dynamic attribute is, which I'm representing either shaded solid circle or a hatched circle, represents belief that can change with time. Either masks work, for example, belief 1, masks work, or belief 0, masks don't work, okay? And within this network, nodes are effectively polarized. So the affective polarization is defined by two parameters, as I was introducing before. In-group love, which we're going to use the parameter alpha to describe it. In-group love drives nodes to conform to the beliefs of their in-group neighbors, meaning same color nodes. And out-group hate, which I'm going to denote by parameter beta, drives nodes to oppose the opinions of their out-group, the opposite color nodes. And we can express this mathematically in the following form. So with parameter alpha, the node will look at all of its neighbors and look at its in-group neighbors and look at which belief is more popular among its in-group neighbors. Is it belief 1 or belief 0? And move towards that more popular belief with strength weight alpha. And it will look at what is belief among its outgroup neighbors, which belief is more popular, and it will distance itself with parameter weight beta. It will distance itself with, and then choose belief based on the kind of balance between in-group and out-group beliefs of the neighbors, and so forth. So this is like very simple mathematical model, but actually it has some benefits. It can be solved analytically in the case of a fully connected network, and it actually has quite complex behavior. So this mathematical model has two steady states. The steady states are global consensus, where both red and blue nodes arrive to the same belief, for example, masking works, or there's partisan polarization, where one group moves towards one belief, and the other group moves to an opposite belief. And both of these states are stable. There's also additional state, which is like non-partisan polarization, but it's an unstable, and any kind of perturbation moves it to partisan polarization state. So here, my mandatory mathematical modeling slides, it shows you how each plot shows the fraction, the y-axis, the fraction of red or blue nodes holding a particular belief 1, for example, masks work. And starting with the same initial state, how beliefs actually, how the system evolves over space. So depending on alpha and beta, which is the affective polarization parameters, and also how the fraction, how many, what fraction of the red group is, of the nodes are red, you can actually have very different solutions. So starting with the same state, you can arrive to you can have consensus where both groups, actually 100% of both groups believe that masking works, or you can have party line polarization with different values of the parameters alpha and beta, where one group believes masking work, and the other group, actually none of the group believes that masking works. And interestingly, only on this steady state of the system, consensus or polarization, is only two parameters determine it. So one parameter, which is shown in the x-axis, is the ratio of in-group love to out-group hate. So this ratio shows in the x-axis, and the y-axis is simply the ratio of group sizes. How big is there a clear majority or not? And these two parameters actually define the phase space of the system. So no matter what initial state you start with, depending on these parameters, you're going to end up either in this yellow regime where consensus, like where all nodes hold the same opinion, or you're going to end up in this red or blue regimes where you have partisan polarization. And again, this regime is unstable and nodes will end up either here or there. Okay. And also interesting, there's a sharp boundary between these two regimes. So this model has lots of interesting implications. I'm just going to highlight one of these. Is actually showing when outgroup hate is bigger than in-group love, meaning to the left of x equal to 1 line, no consensus is possible, which actually might explain lots of social behaviors what we see today. Another consequence of this model is we can also solve this model analytically for special case of network with communities. So it's like specifically for stochastic block model. So we create a network where each node connects to a fraction rho of same color nodes and fraction y minus rho of opposite color nodes. So so for people who study network science, this rho is actually simply homophily. So this measures homophily of the network. And the higher rho, the higher homophily, the more you get this kind of highly clustered nature. Basically, you get echo chambers. You have very tightly, highly clustered, highly linked communities, and which have some links that go to the other side. So we can solve this mathematically. Also, we can solve it analytically. And interestingly, it has the same behavior as the fully connected network, just that parameter rho now renormalizes in-group love and out-group hate. So you have the same phase diagram of the steady states of the system of belief spread within this stochastic block model. But now the x-axis is renormalized. And interestingly, what this means is actually, what does it mean actually? So it means if you start adding connections between the group nodes, so adding connections actually will reduce homophily rho and increases heterophily 1 minus rho. So it reduces rho, so it reduces in-group love, and it increases out-group hate. And this serves to move the system to the left, without changing the sizes, it moves the system to the left. So if it was in a consensus regime, it can move it into the polarized regime where polarization will exist. And this is actually kind of a simple explanation for what has been observed in experimentally by Chris Bale's group, for example, that counterintuitively exposure to the opposite views, so creating links to try to break echo chambers and expose your community to outgroup beliefs, actually there's a backlash. It actually increases political polarization rather than decreasing it. And this model actually explains that because of the emotions that people, or affective polarization, exposure to the opposite groups actually reminds people who their enemies are and what their enemies believe, and actually drives them to oppose those. So, like I said, it's like a very intuitive kind of explanation for this effect that is being observed. But also this model actually not just intuitive explains, but also quantitatively explains what's going on. And this is like the study like we did looking at masking attitudes during the pandemic and also lockdowns attitude to the pandemic. So within our large COVID tweets data set, we can measure when people are discussing specific issues like masking or lockdowns, and then we can measure whether they're expressing pro-lockdown supporting sentiment or against it. And so, as I was showing you before, attitudes towards masking diverged rapidly, like over a span of a month, actually. Support for masking among conservatives dropped substantially. And also lockdowns attitudes. And, after the lockdowns country went to lockdowns, the support for lockdowns dropped among conservatives, and partisan gap emerged with the attitude of the liberals. So this model actually that and also like, so partisan emerged, and actually showing here among all users. But if you look at partisans, active partisans who are tightly linked and retweet political elites, they have even a wider gap in their masking attitudes and lockdowns attitude as well. And if we use the model to estimate affective polarization parameters, actually this is, the mathematical model explains this with just two adjustable parameters that we can actually estimate from, we can infer from the data, alpha and beta, and then we measure other parameters like the initial states, and we can basically quantitatively reproduce this emergence of this partisan gap and the wider gap among more active partisans. And so interestingly, you know, the in-group love, we are estimating that in-group love is still higher than out-group hate, but out-group hate among, for example, partisans is higher, and this higher out-group hate drives this wider, bigger gap between the, so it is quite remarkable, like I said. So with just two adjustable parameters that are statistically estimated from the data, we can explain this divergence of attitudes on these two different issues. Okay, so I spoke about affective polarization, but I would also like to now switch gears and talk about mental health. And you know, you've probably read it in the news that there's been like the psychological distress has been rising among adolescents, especially among girls. If you'll actually, this is data I got from Jonathan Haidt's website, is showing actually depression prevalence is increasing, anxiety prevalence increasing, is actually worse among younger populations, younger people. And it's not just that people are more willing or more likely to talk about mental health distress. I mean, there's actually like visits to the hospitals for self-harm are also increasing. So it's behaviors, you know, their psychological distress is manifesting in some unsafe behaviors as well. And also, unfortunately, suicides has also been rising. So this has been getting lots of attention. What I'm going to be talking about, focusing on, is a specific type of mental health condition called eating disorders. So eating disorders include anorexia, bulimia, binge eating. They start early, and they're actually quite common and quite deadly until fentanyl, opioid crisis actually peaked and has taken over. But before that, eating disorders were the #1 killer, psychological killer of people. And also, eating disorders exploded during COVID pandemic. Here I'm actually showing a plot from the CDC that's showing number of weekly visits to emergency rooms, emergency departments for related to eating disorders. And always, like even before the pandemic, there's a gender gap in eating disorders, like the anorexia and bulimia, that more girls actually suffering from it than boys. And then pandemic hits, you know, there's lockdowns declared and visits to the hospitals drop because people are afraid to go to the hospitals. And afterwards, girls just zoom out, and so many more girls, like the gender gap actually just grows. Boys are protected for some reason. I don't quite understand why, but the girls are actually like really suffering, and many more of them. COVID, you know, eating disorder prevalence among girls just exploded. Of course, you know, social media is a suspect here. You know, is social media fueling eating disorders? There's lots of debate about this, but you know, I do believe that it is playing somewhat of a role. So, for example, you can look at one study from Network Contagion Research Institute looked at number of tweets that mention eating disorders. There's this hashtag that is used by the eating disorders community, and self-harm. This is another hashtag, and the use of this hashtag has quintupled over the course of a year. And also the number of Twitter bios, number of user accounts that self-identify with eating disorders by using the same hashtag, same term, like easy Twitter, has also grown remarkably. So there's something in social media, you know, is driving eating disorders. So we've been actually studying in this. So to look at this problem, we downloaded back, right. Actually, we were racing against time. We downloaded 3 million tweets right around March of 2023, March of last year, right before the access was closed out. So we retrieved 3 million tweets matching a wide variety of keywords, related to diet and weight loss, body positivity, anti-diet culture movement, and also eating disorders. There's like several long string of hashtags. And then we analyzed those interactions between users. So this plot on the right is showing the retweet network. So each dot, there's hundreds of thousands of dots, you can result them individually, but each dot is a user, and they're put together if they retweet each other very frequently. And then we also used GPT to help us, profile communities, tell us what are they talking about. So these dots right here, actually, this is the pro-anorexia community that are glorifying eating disorders. And interestingly, this is the anti-anorexia communities. They're actually they're using counter speech to kind of attack the pro-anorexia and criticize it for being toxic, fat phobic, unhealthy. But there's many other communities discussing all kinds of issues, from weight loss to Ozempic and diet drugs and body positivity. But these communities are all interlinked, and they're communicating with each other. The anorexia community, you can call it a true echo chamber, because actually they have very few outgoing links compared to the ingoing links. So the pro and anorexia community is forming this echo chamber. But then the question is, how unhealthy is this community? How is it actually, does it have any kind of, is it pathological in nature or not? And unfortunately, right now, I cannot go into too much of the detail, but we are actually using large language models to help us explore the mindsets and the emotional states and psychological states. And I'm just going to give the briefest of our overviews about how we can go about using large language models to gain insights into communities, so that we can use the chatbots, large language models, to interrogate communities. So generally, people can take this several ways. You can actually steer language model. You can ask it to reply, respond from a perspective of a liberal, for example. And you can ask all kinds of questions, but it's hard to do it with these organically formed communities, because then they have a simple label that we can apply to them. So we can actually, then people can also use prompt engineering. For example, they can give several examples within a prompt and ask it to reply, give similar replies as you can show it. So this approach is popular right now. People are, for example, RAG-like approaches are very popular. So it's been shown to be less prone to hallucinations, but providing more context is still difficult, cannot overcome the weights of the chatbot's priors. Okay. So we are actually taking a different approach that is also popular, many people are using, but they're using fine tuning. So you directly adjust the model parameters, and then and also with this kind of fine instruction tuning, you can also generate all kinds of responses, both open-ended responses, like answers to open-ended questions, or answers to multiple choice questions. And this is nice, because then if we can get LLMs to respond to multiple choice questions, we can ask it to fill out surveys or even psychometric tests. But this is only feasible for smaller models. We can only directly manipulate the weights of the LLMs only for GPT 3.5 and Llama models, but it's not for us for now. And also another challenge is that really requires training data for fine tuning. And that's what we are developing. We have several papers exploring various ways to create this training data that we teach the LLMs, teach the chatbots to talk in the voice of the specific online community. So this is I can add some links to papers later, but we align language models through fine-tuning, instruction tuning to online communities, and then assess their psychological states by using psychometric tests to probe them with questions from psychometric tests. So if we look, National Eating Disorders Association provides a screener that is used to evaluate individuals' risk of eating disorder. So anybody who can go online and actually take the screener test to see if they actually have problematic behaviors and problematic cognitions that are associated with eating disorders. So after aligning aligning these large language models, Llama 3, to these online communities, we asked questions from this screener. And it does turn out that, yes, the pro-anorexia community is at the high risk. It's scored the highest on this eating disorder screeners. Ketone diet community actually also scored very highly. So they also have problematic cognitions related to eating disorders. But others actually have had less harmful, expressed fewer kind of pathological cognitions, including healthy lifestyle, weight loss community, and anti-anorexia community. So this is just, our initial state, but I think there's lots of potential, on this approach. So key takeaways, but I have more stuff to show you for just a second. So this interaction between the micro and the macro. So individual emotions shape the organization's social systems. They define societal fault lines and divisions, and they're reflected in the structure of attention, specifically the retweet networks or communities. Also interesting to look at the asymmetry of affect. I'm going to come back to it, but and psychological literature, negativity, due to our evolved mechanisms, negative information is actually far stronger than positive information. And also, this also makes negative emotions are also far stronger than positive emotions. And also, like this kind of taking emotions into account actually makes us re-examine the conventional wisdom around echo chambers, the role of echo chambers in our information ecosystems. So I believe that echo chambers actually, they don't polarize specifically, but they do radicalize people. They shape group identity, and due to that, actually, they, the more they shape it, the more they radicalize. And also because of these emotional dynamics, before, earlier models actually thought basically of opinion change had to take into account that network structures change and people put themselves closer to the people who are more similar to them. And over time, people change their beliefs, but it's a very, very slow process. But once you introduce emotional dynamics of affective polarization, then you can actually have beliefs change really rapidly without any changes in network structure. So what does it suggest? Actually, next steps, and I think actually psychological manipulation at scale, like taking into account emotions allows you to consider psychological manipulation with scale. So now, next I'm going to briefly describe, how to create an enemy, language of intergroup conflict, but there's many other new research questions you can answer. I do believe that mental health, part of the mental health distress can be explained through similar processes as online radicalization and psychological contagion. And the questions about what to do later. So just very briefly, this is ongoing work. We don't have any published papers, but this is looking at the language of creating an enemy. And the case study that is actually personally near and dear to my heart is actually the Russia-Ukraine war, because I grew up in Kiev. I was born and grew up in Kiev. So I was horrified when Russians attacked, and all the stories about I spent the first 3 years of my life in Bucha, and then seeing it in the news as the site of the massacres was just unfathomable to me. And it's also really personal to me on personal level, because my best friend, my childhood friend's son, just was killed in September. He died in the battlefronts of the war. So how was this possible? How was such a thing that was unfathomable to me? How could it be possible? Well, I believe that Russians created narratives that scared the other Russians, and justified the horrible barbaric treatment of Ukrainians. And the narratives they created was actually Nazis, that Ukrainians are Nazis. And growing up in Soviet Union, Nazis did horrible things. People, if you want to scare people, you compare them, you tell them that their enemies acting like a Nazi. And this is from a New York Times article that shows actually how mentions of Nazism in Russian news spiked right after the invasion, to drive the fear that generated justification for Russia attacking Ukraine. So this actually led us to dive deep into the language and how do you create an enemy? And based on psychological literature, we developed this model, or the taxonomy of othering language. So othering language is the group self-talk, and this is important, how the group talks to itself that helps shape it's a conceptualization of itself as good and just, and the other group as evil and dangerous as the enemy. And this language of othering has two components. One is in-group victimization, basically fear speech, like how the other group poses threats to your cultural identity or threats to your physical survival. And it also has a component. Another component is how the group talks about the outgroup, and that has vilification, which comparing the outgroup to Nazis, the criminals and drug addicts to scare the in-group, and explicit dehumanization. And we analyzed Telegram messages from the Russian-Ukrainian war. We could actually separate them, Russian war bloggers, Ukrainian war bloggers. And this is actually just showing how each type of this language changes over time. And the interesting thing, like, first of all, Russians war bloggers are using othering language to a greater degree than Ukrainian war bloggers. But also interesting that when it spikes, the other language spikes at these events, actually all these events have to do with US military and security aid to Ukraine. So whenever that's in the news, Russian war bloggers start basically, grievances, and they're being victims, talking about how Russia is being victim. For Ukrainian, the spikes in the othering language is actually related to military gains and losses at the battlefield. But another interesting thing, and I haven't spoken much, but we also have the capacity to measure moral dimensions of language, how moral values are used. And you can see that Russians, this is actually heat map is showing how moral language is used with this, how often it's used within these different othering categories. And Russian war bloggers moralize their language othering to a much greater degree than Ukrainian war. For example, dehumanization is actually linked to this purity, or this is linked to disgust, and threats to culture and identity is linked to the fairness or equality, moral values. Within Ukraine, among Ukrainian war bloggers, actually, it's like they're mostly talking about Russian attacks and how loss of life, so which triggers the care from moral value of care. So this actually just gives us first hints that moralizing and othering language is actually a very, very effective propaganda use. The fact that Russians did use it to convince population. So in overall kind of frame, the way I'm thinking about it, and this is actually like relate to my of interest to my colleagues here who are working on this DARPA INCAS project, which is looking at influence operations. The way I'm conceptualizing this, the social media, the emotional ecosystem, it helps us make sense of the world, make sense of reality. When something happens and we don't have much information about it, we turn to our in-group to make sense. And our in-group is defined by our identity, values, and emotions. And we also interact with our out-group. So what the out-group is saying about this event also shapes what we believe about it, and ultimately how we behave, whether we are using masks or not. And these disruptive events give opportunity for influence campaigns for either the adversaries, internal or domestic, to leverage these emotions, to leverage values and identity, to drive apart, to create this, to create divisions. Okay. Actually, this also conceptualizing that the role of this echo chambers or in-group talk is actually to radicalize, to create sense of identity and belonging, and it can also be used for harm. For example, this is very briefly that the way to explain echo chambers, eating disorders, and echo chambers on Twitter is driving harm is actually that they're radicalizing people into this pathological mentalities related to eating disorders, and the kind of signatures you have of this, that radicalization, people looking for content and then they're dropping into these communities and discussing them and emotionally supporting each other. This has all the signatures of political radicalization. So echo chambers can be dangerous because they strengthen these identities, sometimes pathological identities, and then they create more harmful content that ensnare even more new users. So this was overview of this study of this work that looking at how emotional dimensions of online interactions can really affect what the phenomena that is going on. And I covered them in the different aspects of the phenomena. You can read more about it in these papers. And also would like to thank my collaborators who help with this work. Okay.
Wow, thank you, Kristina. It's a lot of really cool stuff. And really fascinating. You touched on a lot of very big topics, so I'm sure people have some questions. Yeah, so I'll open it up to the group, and as Phil is demonstrating here, if you want to ask a question, please use the Zoom hand and raise your hand, and we'll sort of knock them down one by one. Phil, please go ahead.
Thank you, Kristina. What a fantastic talk. Really, really fascinating. I love your work. And
thank you very much.
Yeah. So I have lots of questions, but I'll start with one and then we can go around if there is time. Can you say a little bit more about your point that echo chambers are more radicalizing people as opposed to polarizing people? Can you explain what you mean by that and how how you're operationalizing the distinction between those two dynamics?
Well, this is the insights are based on this model of mathematical. So I think if everybody was stuck in their echo chambers and they were like really distinct and not connected at all, we would much better, we'd be more likely to reach a consensus where all these echo chambers believe the same thing, like masking works. And once you start connecting, like these echo chambers have different identities. And according to this mathematical, it's all the evidence. I don't have empirical evidence. It's only motivated by the mathematical model for the most part. And the mathematical model shows that as you start connecting the echo chambers and people are exposed to the views of their enemies, they react and retrench. But what is the role of echo chambers? But the role of echo chambers is actually to strengthen the identity. So like echo chambers, like, liberals get, for example, become more liberal and conservatives will become more conservative. So this is what I mean by radicalizing.
Thank you. Now I understand. Okay. So if you let's say weaken the echo chambers and bring people together, then that's what you're saying, that you would have more polarization.
You will have more polarization, right?
But if you separate them, okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
That's right.
Awesome. I'll let other people, if there are other questions.
Yeah, I haven't looked at the empirical thing, I don't have it, but the mathematical model, I mean, it's like very, very simple and it can be, but it seems like to explain this phenomena like that.
Mm-hmm. It's very neat, and it connects to stuff that we're doing on belief and how beliefs change and connections between different beliefs.
Yep.
I guess if there is no other questions, then that leads to my next one, which is like, so in your example, like for specific when you try to map to tune the parameters to reproduce empirical data that you observed related to different beliefs, like for example the anti-masking or anti-shutdown and so on, you had to tune the parameters. So we're
not tuning, actually, we're not tuning parameters.
Fitting.
We're not fitting
parameters. So I misunderstood. Thank you. Please explain.
Yeah, so we actually, I should this is the first time I'm really talking about this, so I should say we're not tuning parameters to the data. We're doing statistical estimation based on data. So just their transitions, like looking at, okay, so here's a group of red nodes, and they looked at, and here's how many red nodes believe and group opinion one, and here's how many blue nodes believe in opinion on time one. At time two, this is how many of this, and we construct estimates based on that. So that's based on this, how many nodes transition from belief one to, how many red nodes transition from belief one to belief zero between time step one, time step two. That's it. We're not tuning outcomes. We're just looking at the changes.
The whole trajectory.
The trajectory, that's right, and looking at changes in beliefs. So, and in fact, first it was an interesting side note that first we were getting some nonsensical results, and turned out that our ideology estimation model, like we had to split group into and we were using a model that had like 65% accuracy, and it gave completely nonsensical results. So then we dove into data trying to understand make a better ideology classification model. And we got it to be like 95% accurate, on this benchmarks. And once we did this, then actually everything fell into place. So it was actually, sometimes you need really high accuracy in your models to get it.
Sorry, if I may, so that's, thank you, that's perfect. That makes a lot of sense. My question was about, like, how do you interpret the fact that to capture different beliefs or the dynamics of opinion change related to different beliefs, do you have to assume that there are different levels of in-group love or out-group hate? Does
Probably.
that, like, one could assume that those things are independent of specific beliefs, but so how do you see that connection?
Well, there's definitely, that's definitely happening. People, it is very heterogeneous, and people don't have it. So, but modeling, like when we looked at all users, we modeled, say, okay, there's only one parameter in group love and not group hate. Then we looked at subset of users. So when we look at partisans who frequently retweeted political elites, that was a different population of users. And then we had some parameters for them, and then they were different. They were higher in both in group love and non-group hate were both higher.
Okay. You don't have to assume that they are the same for the whole population.
That's right. Yeah.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I'll shut up.
Awesome. Anybody else have any questions they want to jump in? I
Do
can
you
ask
have a question? Okay, yeah.
Oh.
Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Oh, hi.
Yeah.
Hello. Hi, Kristina. Nice to see you, and thanks a lot for a great talk. It was very interesting. Especially, I'm also trying to use LLMs for different social challenges these days. So the last part of using LLM for intervention for the mental health issue was especially interesting. I will definitely look into the papers. I just wondering, you already kind of mentioned about it, but like recent studies mentions that like LLM tends to drift their behavior toward their inherent traits, such as like being more positive, being more liberal, being more persuading, etc. So I think that would be the core issues when you are creating like a new agents for doing any kinds of intervention. So I wonder what was your observations, whether the fine-tuning method was like enough for preventing such behavior drifting, or if you can share just a bit more experience on that, I think that would be really, really great.
Sure. No, this is a really great question. Thank you. And we're just now starting to publish, all of this. Actually, my students are right now at EMNLP conference in Miami, presenting actually some of the methods. So yes, first question is, how do you align language models to kind of align their biases with those of the human groups, And the second question is, how do you measure the fidelity of the alignments? So we have actually been looking at this, how do you measure the fidelity of alignment? So we're looking at style, semantics, emotions, values being expressed. So we have all those dimensions to measure how good responses mimic the responses of human groups. And we show that instruction tuning, we have a method for like this is how to create data for instruction tuning. We show that actually that results in a better, higher fidelity alignment along those things than steering or the in context learning, like other RAG, those other methods. So yes, this is exactly what we're exploring. Alignment is not perfect still, even like aligning to liberals versus conservatives is not perfect, but we do get already better insights than vanilla models or even steered models.
I see. I'm looking forward to reading the paper. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Ben?
Hi, yeah, thanks for your talk today. Super interesting. So I wondered, you've got some really interesting insights that are sort of these system level notions about how polarization is happening, how extremization is happening, and where mental health fits into this picture. I wonder, seeing this at a system level as you do you have new notions about where interventions should start or what order these should happen in that follow from your work? Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Again, I should have spent more time talking about, because I don't want to leave people at this like really pessimistic and sad note, but I think it is possible, So for example, my colleague, Budika Natasinga, is exploring mathematically, within mathematical models, how do you reduce the bad effects of affective polarization. So we're still exploring it. But preliminary work suggests that if you link people across ideologies, across groups, if they share the same opinion, then you link them. Then it actually helps reduce it. And what is that? That's actually common ground, finding the common ground. And there was like a recently science paper that showed if you actually promoting common ground, find common ground, if you do link people across ideologies, if they share the same beliefs, kind of it helps improve the whole system level effects, right? So I think I do believe that's kind of a secret superpower that hopefully, if platforms were interested in promoting peace and consensus, they might want to focus on that. Unfortunately, our current design of our ecosystems with its financial incentives is probably not best suited for promoting common ground.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristina. If I could just ask one question, and I think we'll have to wrap up.
Okay.
So you were talking a little bit about using LLMs, and I just wanted to clarify if are you, I wasn't sure if you were saying that you're trying to get the models to align to these groups so that you can sort of like further mine data from the data that you have, or if you're trying to sort of, I guess, piggyback on Ben's idea, like thinking about different kinds of interventions to sort of like more humanistically communicate with them in a way that they like sort of have a better understanding, if you will. So yeah, if you could just expand a little bit more on like what like sort of the future work maybe that you're trying to go.
There's lots of possibility for future work. In fact, one of my collaborators actually in the eating disorder space, she was actually one of the authors of that chatbot that NIDA, the National Eating Disorder Association, deployed, which started giving this really harmful advice. Why? Because it was taking evidence guide suggestions from Mayo Clinic about how to reduce weight, but those suggestions don't apply to this vulnerable population of eating disorder people. So it actually, it was taken off by 3. So after 3 days, this chatbot was discontinued. But I think it is possible. I think you can actually, there's not enough mental health resources and peers and support. So you can actually design, chatbots using this kind of more insights, adjusting them, having them understand the communities better. They can talk more empathetically to them. So hopefully in the future, I hope this will be possible. But for now, I'm using this to basically answer questions, survey these communities, which we can survey. Many of these communities are hard to reach. Cannot be directly questioned, but I'm using these methods to trying to gain more insights into them.
Very cool, very cool. And yeah, I totally agree. I it's like one of the superpowers of these things, right? Is like infinite empathy, infinite patience to be able to like talk to people at any time of the day. And so I think there's a lot of possibilities. Anyway, I think we're gonna have to wrap up. We were a couple minutes over. Thanks so much for a really interesting talk, touching on so many large, super cool projects. If everybody could please, thank Kristina again with your Zoom hands here.
And thank you very much. And I hope to continue working with you guys in the future as well.
For sure. Right. So thanks everybody for being here, and I hope to see you at the next OSoMe Speakers event. Thanks. Bye, everybody.